nervous.
Sorry.
What is this?
Because you were in here.
You were like, yeah.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Sorry, I like
So what?
Dude,
It was so good. Much. I can't forget this is italicizing over.
Yeah.
Well, she was like, yes. Thank you. Just
I
like,
really have a response to that. I would just wait. No, I didn't. Oh, no. I didn't. Oh, see? Not mine.
Yeah.
either way.
The elders.
Go.
Anyone come next week? We have Jamboree.
I'm good.
Yeah.
What grade is it?
She said that she messaged y'all like right before spring break and y'all never
No.
That's fun.
You teaching?
Yeah.
There's
You would imagine having to sit this ball.
yeah.
I would. Oh. So you said she's here, but you like
Yeah, let's, maybe we keep making enough coffee, it'll drown out.
I was gonna say, Tony, you make that cup of coffee.
yeah, you could like this. Yeah.
That's an exaggeration.
I'll take two.
I've already had
Except for
Oh,
fifth
mine
grade.
is not up
Are
there.
you taking this school? It was like, I was like, the true test of the rules.
You were asking me to grab it.
And I worked on something. Right. I was gonna her high school. I thought that was. Yeah, she didn't have any with her. Yeah. She was just lovely. Her name was this last
I feel like you know more about this than I
She challenged me to evaluate the bits.
You narrated. Yeah, obvious.
And I checked out the
Yeah, that's she counted the whole table from the whole college.
she like was testing me to see if I was
Yes, 100%. Especially because she could.
I was like, I took a test for school. It's only 5 grades.
Michael. I'm doing this all. It was so it's based off of a book that came out. But it's I don't know if you've seen it. It's pretty kind of similar like in space. It's there is not a single use of like magic. You really don't know. Like maybe just for like a jump scare or two. Like one maybe, but it was like nothing. No. Yeah, yeah. There was like,
You guys are gonna be.
that was my first hit. It was sweet. Yeah, I wrote 12 And I was like, you know, I was there, I'm feeling good. Yep. So, are you doing? Didn't answer for like 3 hours. And he texted me like 1 more time.
And you still didn't say anything?
Not until after I left dinner, and I was there on the back. Had to kill
Yeah, you were right. Well, I knew I was just like, I went back, I was like, the pronunciation of the word, is that what you're going over today? Or speaking on it some sort.
This, it was. Me talking about it tonight? You want to throw it in there? You guys, Brian, he'll bring that in.
But anyways, I went back and looked at it, because there was somewhere I was in a broke it down.
Yes.
And then it didn't say, but it's together.
It was good. We decided to get to it today. We talked about a lot of this stuff. I know especially business people. Theology and philosophy. You know the standards and deviation taxes. In 2015, and we looked at the states that they made decisions, and you look at like, everybody recognizes the next recommendation, you're just helping them have something to look at them. So anyways, we did that, and that's a pretty good question about legalizing so it was fun. But I didn't dive into the objections that Christians have. That's where that stuff goes. Yeah, I ran this morning before my meeting. I woke up with my first one. I was kind of first time running 5K around the neighborhood. It felt good. We had pretty good taste.
Is it pretty hilly?
Yes. Yeah, that elevation. There were a couple of times but it was really Tommy said so. I'm trying to find a loop that I can do and not have to. Is that
But he said, but we had to watch the time. It wasn't that me today, but we don't have to watch the time.
Or Pensacola.
Dude, if we can run to Atlanta. Was that, is that the 30 minutes?
That's gonna be wrong.
I think it was a Dolby Cinema or something.
That's where I watched it.
Is that an area? They're talking about Dolby Cinema.
This Friday, you won't be.
I'll go pick
Next
up.
Friday, I will. Where's that watch Friday? Because I return with the. So I'm going down to the rest.
Because we go. I can't go there. I'm out this week.
What is it that's a big?
But Thursdays and Fridays are pretty much the same.
I just don't want to do it. Like that whole All right, everybody, let's yeah, you're good. I'm gonna get out. Let's make a quick announcement and see if we can beat Billy to the podium. So he has to just wait and be awkward. We are not gonna have Hub this Monday because Billy made an executive decision, I quote, not to have Hub, mostly because a lot of you will be doing Jamboree and such, and also our families will be coming back from Lives to Leaders. So a couple of reasons there. So we want to have Hub. We'll let you know if we do anything different though, like, so just keep an eye on the group meet. The Not So Secret Sister, another new Billy, I just couldn't remember. The Not So Secret Sister program, if you want to do that, then you need to turn that in by tonight. I think Isabella has extra forms, and so if you want to do that, then you can fill out the form real quick and give it to her tonight. But if you haven't yet turned that in, make sure you get it to her tonight. Was there anything else in that text? Okay, I didn't think so. I think that's all. Yeah, I think that's it. So, all right, Billy. Okay, let's work through our roadmap quickly to bring us up to speed where we are tonight, which is going to be working on some potholes if you were to stay in evidence for Jesus. Let's see, last week, what we did, I think you guys pretty much have your cultivation questions down, and I hope you're utilizing those. I think you got your corralling questions. I've been hearing those come out in conversations where you're trapping people. Good job. So last week, you decided to go through evidence for Jesus, but we only focused on just the Roman sources, and then didn't get too much into the Jewish sources, just as a friendly reminder. And then you guys were not as prepared for the resurrection evidence. So let's come back to that one. So you're on that roadmap. You've cultivated a conversation. You corralled it in. You're going through evidence for Jesus. And then you come across the fact that you want to discuss the resurrection of Jesus. You have 6 ways to do that. In your map, you're working along, and it has those 6 houses that are strategically colored for memory purposes. So y'all tell me, what facts do we have about Jesus? And give them to me in order based off how we discussed them with those houses. What you got? Okay, he really died. All right, how do we know that he really died? Well, you got a crucifixion victim, and the Romans were experts at killing somebody. They ensured that somebody was going to not get off the cross alive. All right, so the red house, remember, it represents he really died. All right, what else? Go ahead.
Oh, the disciples were to die for him.
All right, they were willing to die for him. So you got to remember, these disciples are following Jesus, and they are teaching, and especially when you go through the book of Acts, you find that they are teaching this message that Jesus lived, and he is the Messiah, and he was raised from the dead after he was killed, and they are willing to die for that. So you read Acts chapter 4, Acts chapter 5, and you find the apostles as well as the disciples willing to stand up, and if they get taken to jail, they're going to be taken to jail. All right, so he really died, and the disciples were willing to die for that. What else?
Why did Paul and James convert?
Okay, why did Paul and James convert? You had these religious, you had Paul, who was a Pharisee, a religious leader, and he's convinced that this man, Jesus, is the Christ because he saw him on the road to Emmaus. James, who is the brother of Jesus, in his ministry, thought that he thought Jesus was off his rocker, and he wanted to bring him back home, that he would be teaching all these things and doing these things. Well, you find in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says that Jesus appeared to James. So you understand why you find him in Acts chapter 1. He's listed among the disciples. And in Acts chapter 15, he is one of the religious leaders in the church in Jerusalem, along with the apostles. And I believe that you have a letter written by him as well in the New Testament. I believe he writes the book of James. So he really died. The disciples were willing to die for this message. Why did James and Paul convert? And what else you get? What's another one? All right, the grave was empty. All right, so there was no body there. That would have been the easiest thing to shut down Christianity, was to proffer up a body. So this man who said that he was going to live, he was going to die, he was going to be buried for 3 days, and he was going to rise from the dead. Let's just show that dead body, and now you have no resurrected Messiah, okay? So it would have been easy, but nobody brought him up. The Romans didn't, so they were trying to take him out because he made himself a self-appointed king. You can't do that in the Roman Empire. The Jews could have shown the body because they wanted to shut this down because they didn't like him, because they thought he was blaspheming. So you got an empty tomb, and it doesn't make sense the apostles would have stolen the body, because what did they gain from telling a lie? Well, nothing. They got death, they got punishment, they got kicked out of their hometowns, things like that. So it doesn't make any sense that they would have lied. Okay. What else you got? So we got ROYG. Remember, this is bit. Okay. So what?
Because of their appearances.
Because of the appearances. Okay, so Jesus actually appeared. It wasn't that he was just this phantom, and it wasn't that it was a hallucination. And I'm going to give you all these again, just so you have them written down. That's where you have your little handout for tonight. But it wasn't this hallucination that everybody's experiencing. He actually appeared to them. They touched his side. They enjoyed time with him. He spent 40 days with him. So he really did appear to them. And so because of the appearances and what they were teaching, okay? And then what's the last one?
Preached early.
All right, it was preached early. This is something within 2 years of Jesus' death and resurrection that we have. They believe that this man really was raised from the dead. Now, all of this is important. So you've gone through your evidence. All this is important for our discussion tonight, because if you were to stay on just evidence for Jesus, I know we can veer off, we can talk about reliable witnesses, and we can go to the Bible is inspired, and that's where you've got the hand in there to be able to talk about how we know the Bible is the Word of God, and we'll come back to that another time later on. But if you were to stay on just evidence for Jesus, some people are going to have some critical questions, and the 3 potholes that I have down tonight are the ones that we're going to spend a little bit of time discussing, okay? And I just think that it's a fun discussion for various reasons. So get your hand out, and we'll talk about some naturalistic explanations. So that's going to be the first one. We're going to talk about dying and rising gods. That's the second category. And then we'll talk about miracles, how somebody would just rule out the resurrection because they don't believe in miracles in general, okay? So these naturalistic explanations, just for you have them written down. What I mean by this is this is not even up, all right. It looks good on my side. Howdy. Nope. Hit me. You gotta swap it back there? You're acting like you know what you're doing? Me too. It's fun. All right, we'll keep going. All right, so naturalistic explanations. All right, there are going to be 5 of them that we're going to talk about. And this is what people... There it was. See, I knew it was around here somewhere. We use Apple TV. I like Apple TV. All right, so a couple of different ways that you could talk about what people are going to say to kind of get, this story about Jesus. How are you really going to work through it? And I know we discussed these a little bit, but I wanted to go ahead and have them laid out for you because I think it's important for you to have them stored up in your mind. If somebody were to come back and they're going to say, listen, I don't really think Jesus was raised from the dead. You say, well, that's an interesting question. Why not? How'd you come to that conclusion? And they're going to say, well, maybe Jesus actually didn't die, okay? So it was just he was in a coma, okay? He was just the mostly dead. And so what we talked about with he really died is that crucifixion victims don't get off the cross alive. And the Romans knew that, and they knew how to handle that efficiently and really, really well, okay? So if he were just in a coma, then just Roman history, that they would let somebody do that, I mean, this was kind of a big deal. And especially as they were heading, the Romans and the Jews were heading into a weekend that had a lot of significance to it. You were heading into the Passover. And so they're like, hey, look, we got to get these crucified victims off the cross. We can't let them go. That wouldn't make any sense. So let's just go ahead and expedite the killing process. So they were going to go around. They were going to break the legs. They don't break the legs of Jesus because they find that he was already dead. They pierce his side. The blood and the water come out, which is just to confirm that that really happened. All right, we've discussed the theft or the fraud. That could be the thing. Maybe somebody stole the body or the disciples just forgot, potentially, where the tomb was. You're not going to forget where the religious leader of, the Christians was laid. Especially when you got guards that are outside of it, it'd be easy to identify. So that's going to be one of the things. we're going to spend some time tonight, and this is the fun part about these different dying and rising gods, as we'll discuss, is that maybe it was a legend. You had this historical man named Jesus, and as time went on, people made up stories the same way they did about all these other religions that are out there. They just made up these stories about this person. And so the truth will come out eventually that this man actually did not exist, that when he did exist, if he did exist, then certainly no resurrection would have happened here. The hallucinations theory, they saw something, but it wasn't real. They thought it was something important, but they were just all overcome with grief and just upset, and they wanted to see Jesus again, so they just imagined collectively that they saw him. Many people have these, supposed hallucinations after they're going through grief or extreme amounts of stress and things along those lines, but for all of them, including, as Paul talks about them, the 500 disciples, the 500 people in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, he talks about 500 people, but also, do you think that Paul was overcome with grief? And he was worried about the crucified Messiah? No, right? He was opposed to it. So why would he be receiving a hallucination? Well, he didn't, okay? That wouldn't have lined up. And James, maybe, his family, he was upset with it. And so maybe he was overcome with grief, but that just comes a little bit later, okay? And then you got the science of the gaps. We were discussing this in our class today, and I thought this was a good way to put this on here as well, is that we don't know what happened. Somebody may come along, they're like, all right, let's talk about this whole thing. Is that, there could be a lot of reasons, other things too, like maybe there was just this mass grave, and they just, instead of putting him in a tomb, they just put him in a grave, along with all these other crucified victims, because we found that in the Roman Empire, in the archaeological discoveries of it. Maybe he was just thrown there and he's just another head count. But that's not the way he was treated, especially when you consider just 7 days prior, or a few days prior on that Sunday when he comes into Jerusalem and he's treated as a king. And you think they're just going to let him just be thrown into a pit when they're the ones that were taking off their cloaks and putting branches and saying, "Behold the king"? Okay, you're not going to be able to just throw him in there. Even if they think that he's a king, he's going to be raised, you're not going to treat him that way, which is also why they couldn't find, that's why they wouldn't be mistaken on the grave, and they're like, oh, they went to the wrong place. So the science of the gaps is this idea. Some people say, God of the gaps, we don't understand how the world works, so what people have done, they've created all these different beliefs. So we don't know how the sun rises and sets, so let's say it's a god who brings it across. We don't know where the seasons come from. That sounds like a mythical story, so let's describe it as a lady who comes back from Hades, and when she comes up it's spring. When she goes back down to visit Hades, it turns to winter. So that's the god of the gaps. Well, science of the gaps is we'll eventually have a naturalistic explanation. So we don't know what happened, but there's probably an explanation, and it's certainly not resurrection. Okay, so that's the idea. I want you to have these down because I think they're important. We've already gone through the evidence, but somebody's going to come in with what we call a naturalistic explanation. So we say we look at the evidence for Jesus and it's supernatural. They come in like, we don't believe in the supernatural. So of course we're not going to follow things like this because we don't believe that there's anything other than this world. All right, the next part we're going to do, all right, I created these with the youth group, and I didn't pass them out last time because I forgot about them, and I made them again. I got some newspapers for you guys to learn about Jesus. Now, you're going to get distracted reading all this, but I made it in like 700 font so you can see the words really clearly. But we're going to be talking about, if you go to page 3, we're going to talk about myth or Messiah. So here's your newspaper for the night. You can take this with you and read it or just discard it, whatever you want to do. Just some light bedtime reading. All right, we're going to talk about, I'm going to get over there, myth or Messiah. All right, while you're getting your newspaper, all right, it was just delivered today from the Jerusalem Inquiry. Dying and rising gods. I don't know if you like mythology. I love mythology. I like studying all of these ancient stories and just kind of how they developed over time, but also just the fun facts about them. Stories are important, and us knowing the difference between a story that actually happened and a story that was fabricated or made up. I got a little quiz for you, okay? And you got a picture to go along with it, okay? I'm going to tell you about the wreck of a particular boat, okay? You fill in the title for me. You ready? I got it great. I got it blued out just in case you may get too close to what the answer may be. Here's some facts, all right? You ready? You tell me what wreck I'm describing, all right? There was a British ocean liner. It was about 800 feet long. It weighed more than 60,000 tons and could carry about 3,000 passengers. The ship had a top cruising speed of about 24 knots, had 3 propellers, and about 20 lifeboats. This ocean liner also hit a iceberg, very sad, and on its maiden voyage in the month of April. So, same month that we're in right now. When it hit the iceberg, tore open a part of the starboard side, the forward portion of the ship, sinking it along with about 2,000 passengers. If you were to put a title to this wreck, what would you say it is? What did I just describe to you? Absolutely wrong. This is the wreck of the Titan, also known as Futility. This is a book that was written by Morgan Robertson well before Titanic even existed. This book was written 14 years before the disaster took place, and several years before construction even began on the Titanic. Now, with all of you with a foil hat, in your conspiracy theories, you just put on your hat and you're thinking, okay, what just went on here? You've got a book 14 years before the Titanic exists, and it's called the Titan. That's close if I'm looking at the English letters here. And it has a lot of similarities to it. What do you think went on? You give me an explanation. They knew what was going to happen. Aliens wrote the Titan, right? Okay, that's an option.
You are messing with us, and this book is not real.
Okay, so maybe I'm not reliable, maybe in other ways, but on this one, potentially, you can ask Uncle Google and Cousin Chat. Ask them if the wreck of the Titan, also known as the Futility, is a real book. Justin, since you questioned me, you go right ahead. Yeah, because we all know Chat's more reliable. He doesn't invent any hallucinations at all. Last time I looked, that's a naturalistic explanation. Is this a real book?
I can't spell. Joke's on you, I'm gonna go to Gemini instead. Hey, yeah, so it's real.
Okay, all right, so now it's been proven very quickly with adequate amount of research. Let's all ask him the second corralling question. How'd you come to that conclusion? You used AI? Are you convinced?
I'm still not convinced.
Okay, all right. Somebody else help me understand this. It's a real book, actually happened. The Titanic actually happened, correct? All right, take your foil hat off and say yes, now put it back on, all right?
The Titanic name was based off of this book.
Okay, so was that retroactively put on there? But we know that it was called the Titanic before it even launched, okay? That was the name of it. Yep.
But it was before construction.
Was this a fiction book?
Yep. Heard somebody over here.
It's a fictional novel, like, so
Yeah.
it didn't actually happen.
No, it's just a novel.
Okay.
But it's eerily similar, isn't it? So what's going on? Yes, ma'am.
Did they come up with the Titanic after this?
Okay, so maybe the story of the Titanic was invented after this? Well, no, that was just a boat that was launched. I mean, like, Titanic is a literal, it's an actual boat that was created, called the Titanic, had the specifications to it. I don't think they used this as the building plans for it. Okay, this was just a little novel that was out there.
Well, passenger, like, I guess, travel on boats and stuff, especially like this was when they were like getting into gigantic shipbuilding. It was a big part of like culture and life, and it was something that people knew about. So one person decided, well, we all know about this. I'm gonna write a book where something bad happens, and Titan is just a nice word to describe something big and strong, and so I think it's just a coincidence.
Okay, the key word, quinky dink, right? Did you say quinky dink? Nice, that's what I'm talking about. That was the word I had in mind. 5 points. So it's a quinky dink, right? Now, the word coincidence, all right, as you think about just things happening, it's like, well, that was very similar to that, right? We've seen this before. In this kind of setting, I mean, it really is just a coincidence. It is an oddity that these things exist, but we see coincidences all the time, right? This is not that big of a deal. Now, you may be looking at it and like, the Titanic borrowed from, well, it didn't borrow from it. Like, there's no way you could have done that and created that story and then for them to say, okay, let's see if we can live out this book and run into this iceberg and cause the ship to break. No, it just happens to be very similar. But just because it is similar, does that mean that one copied the other one? Well, it can't be the case. One was written 14 years beforehand. Couldn't be that, it doesn't logically make sense that somebody would try and replicate the book with that many catastrophes that went on there. It was simply a coincidence. Now, I use this as an example for when we discuss these topics of what we call dying and rising gods. If you're familiar with your mythologies, or you go to page 3 in the newspaper for the day, there are some potential, we're going to say potential, stories that look like maybe resurrection accounts. Because somebody's going to come in and they're going to say, listen, Christianity just fabricated the story about Jesus. So that front cover that you had, he's a liar, a lunatic, or a legend. I know this is a little different than Lewis's Trilemina because it says liar, lunatic, or Lord. But for my purposes, I put liar, lunatic, or legend. Legends are developed over time. You have an event that happens, and then you begin to tell the story. So it's like I went fishing, and I caught a 2-pound bass. Well, maybe the next time I tell it, I caught 2 4-pound bass. The next time I caught a 20-pound carp. Okay, it's like I could create a legend based off of an event that actually happened and continue to add to it. Well, somebody may say Christianity looks a lot like a legend because I don't believe in supernatural things happening. I don't believe in the resurrection. And maybe we can go back and we can find a story or 2 or 3 that have the same kind of characteristics as Jesus. Maybe that's what's going on here. All right, so you guys that maybe know mythologies, and I've got a few of them that are just mentioned here just in passing. That gives you just a foothold to be able to go research a little bit more later. But can you think of any mythological stories that have similarities? Let's just start with similarities to Jesus. What you think? Not just resurrection, but just across the board. Are there any mythologies like Greek and Roman and Mesopotamian and Egyptian that have similarities to Jesus?
I mean, there's a lot of myths where the gods have children.
Okay, all right, good. So in these tales, you have gods that have children. All right, so that's going to be the thing. We're claiming in Christianity that Jesus is God's son while also being God himself. So it's the word of God, God becoming flesh and dwelling among us. So, you know, you got one what with 3 who's. All right, that's the idea. You've got one what, which is the essence of God. He's 3 who's, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. You got Jesus, who is one what with, or one who with 2 whats. Okay, he's both God and human. Okay, there's that. So, anyways, you've got these myths, right, where they have children. So Christianity looks just a lot like that, where you got a God that has a child, because we all know where like Zeus came from, right? He's a child of who? Do what? Kronos. All right, and where did he come from with Kronos? Popped out of his head, okay? Literally, that's where he came from. And I think, what was it, Athena popped out of his thigh? Something like that. You can check me on all this. You're going to be the expert now, Kim, on mythologies, because you nodded. But, all right, so there's commonality. All right, there's sons. All right, what else can you think of? Any other mythological stories you can think of that have similarities to Jesus? Okay. Well, no, I think that's good just to think about how we are fascinated with, like, what would it be like if somebody came back from the dead? I mean, we are. It's like, because we don't know, cultivation question, that 5th one, what happens when we die? We want to know what happens when we die. And so we invent stories to think, what if somebody died and then came back? Maybe they're just living here and walking around the walking dead. But what does the afterlife look like? Maybe they went to the great beyond and they come back. We had a lot of stories where people said they went to the beyond, they saw the light, and they had some kind of experience in the other world. Harry Potter did that, and so like he comes back. So you have those kind of things. Is that a resurrection story? I think there's a resurrection stone. But you have these stories that are fascinated with dying and coming back. And I think you are onto something. They're just our fascination, our human proclivity to look at interesting facts about that. All right? What you got?
this talks about Dionysus, and I'm not even gonna try to say the other name, but miracle workers and teachers. So like Dionysus, water to wine, and
Okay.
the other guy did like healing. He was like the Greek god of healing.
Okay. All right. So you got Dionysus. Okay. Yeah, that's what you said. It's just a different pronunciation. But Dionysus, I just think Percy Jackson, right? You've got Dionysus that's there. But he is a miracle worker, and what is he known for is the water to wine, because he is the god of the vine, okay? And so it's like, Jesus is just borrowing from that, because that was a well-known mythology during the 1st century and then 1st and 2nd century BC. And so Jesus is a miracle worker like Dionysus, okay? So that'd be another one, all right? What else? You're on the right track coming up with things like that. Can you think of some other similarities?
Having control over like the elements. I think of him calling the storm, walking on the water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you've got these gods and these different stories that have control over, a lot of different things, the earth itself or the components of it, so Jesus just fits in line with that as well. Now, there's going to be some specific ones, okay? And so you can dive into these a little bit more. But there's going to be some specific ones where somebody's going to say, no, this has the telltale signs, the fingerprints of resurrection, where you had somebody that died and they went to the underworld. Now, this is important with what we teach in Christianity, is that you can see using Psalm 16 that tells us that the Messiah is going to go to, he's going to die, he's going to go to the grave, but he's not going to remain there, he's going to come out. He doesn't see corruption. Peter preaches that in Acts 2. He preaches it in Paul preaches it in Acts 13. But some people are saying, he went and he preached to the spirits in prison, in hell, and gave them the opportunity to come out. That's not what 1 Peter 3 talks about. Okay? But minimally, you have that Jesus went to the grave for 3 days. We're told the Messiah was going to do that. Well, some of these mythological stories have somebody going down, like in Greek mythology, where you're going to go to Hades, or you're going to go to the Hadean realm where Hades dwells. But there's also other ones. There's Egyptian and Mesopotamian gods along with that. Now, I give proper credit where credit is due. If you guys know Andrew Gifford, he put these slides together, so I have robbed them, because one of the best series of classes that happened here at Dalraida, we have a lot of them, they're good and biblical and solid. I just really enjoyed this one because of these things. Gibbs taught a class on the resurrection. It was a whole quarter about the resurrection, and each week had a different part. Well, one of the weeks was on dying and rising gods. Okay, so I robbed his information because it was a lot easier versus me putting it together. So here's my credit to you, Giff. This is your slide presentation. But if you want to listen to those lessons and learn more about the theology and the teaching behind the resurrection, as well as some of the complexities, those links are up on our website. You can look up his name with resurrection on dalraida.org, and you can come across those. Excellent, excellent, excellent. But he puts these together, and so that's why I've taken them. But these are just the common ones anyways. All right. The first one that comes out is the story of Osiris. Okay, so this is an Egyptian god. And most of these stories, and this is interesting as well, is that they also have a female counterpart, or a cohort, if you will, that and people said this about Jesus later on down the road, right? Is that he had a female friend, Mary Magdalene. There were a lot of stories. What was it? Dan Brown in the Da Vinci Code that talked about potentially Jesus having a spouse. There's been some people recently that have talked about God potentially having a spouse, as some of the ancient Near Eastern literature has talked about. And that's a whole other conversation that'd be a lot of fun to do with later. But these mythological stories did have a common thread, that there was a female cohort. Well, that's not what happens with the story of Jesus. Now, are there a group of women that were supportive of Jesus in his ministry? Yeah. All right, that's not that big of a deal. You got Mary Magdalene, you got the mother of James and John, you got the mother of Jesus himself, Mary coming along through those. You've got Salome and some other people that are in there. And that's all fine. But it's not like he has a spouse, though. So once again, think about the Titan and the Titanic. Just because there are similarities, don't try and extend that beyond what is actually there. There is no female cohort to Jesus. He is the way that he is. Just because a female may be mentioned in the story, and just because the first person to see the resurrected Jesus is a woman, doesn't mean that it looks like these stories. Okay? So be cautious of somebody. And I'm prepping you because somebody's going to come on, and you've seen the little reels or the TikToks where somebody says, this is what happened. Jesus did this or that. Well, you got to go to the original source. You got to find it out. Okay. So he has this female cohort. Osiris does. Her name is Isis. He ends up being betrayed and killed by Typhon. And what happens is he's brought back to consciousness in the afterlife by Isis. But what happens along with this is that the king of the underworld, let me get my notes up here. All right, so when Typhon kills him, he puts him in a box, and he brings him to a party, traps him in there, puts him in a box, kills him, and then he breaks him up into 14 individual pieces. Takes these individual pieces, scatters them all over the world, and Isis has to go find all of them and put him back together. When she puts him together, then he is able to be raised. Now, if you look up an image of Osiris, and it's depicted a little bit here with this statue, he's always depicted as green in complexion or black because supposedly he's dead. Okay, so that's the thing, is that he died and he may have been put back together and came back to some extent, but he was not a true resurrection, because what we teach with Jesus, and this is going to be the similarities and the differences, just because you had this story of a God that went to the underworld and the king there did whatever to him, he was still mostly, this Osiris was mostly dead, okay? And it doesn't match up with the story of Jesus. When you read the gospel accounts, the body that went into the grave is the same body that came out. They recognized him, unless he didn't want somebody to recognize him, but for the most part, they all recognized him, and he had the attributes of what went into the grave. Also some oddities with Osiris. Isis found 13 of the 14 pieces. One of them was missing. You get to find out what it was. But in the story, is it really a resurrection account or is it not? That's got to be the deal. And so as you look through, and I've got them down here, myth or Messiah, the Osiris option, he was killed, he's chopped into pieces, he's put it back together. As this guard is considering these things, it sounds promising, but he stays in the underworld, and he does some magical things down there, but he doesn't really come back because he looks like he's still dead. Okay, so that'd be the picture. So there might be some common things, is that he does die and he goes to the afterlife, but it doesn't quite add up. And the way that people worship Osiris, it has to do with fertility and some insight on a lot of these gods, by the way. And this tells you a lot about the human condition. When mankind comes up with gods, they look like men. If you read Romans chapter 1, what does Paul say? He says people abandoned the Creator and went toward what? The creation. They started worshiping the creation over the Creator. If mankind's going to come up with a God, do you think they're going to come up with a God who's going to give them good, solid morals to follow, or are they going to give them something to that they can live up and do whatever they want to? I mean, you think about Dionysus, you brought that one up. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm good. That's my patron god because I want to have what he has, right? So they go and they drink, they get drunk, they're like, we're serving our God. There's a common theme with a lot of these gods that are created, and they can show the fingerprint of somebody actually creating them because they're not moral beings that you would want to follow. They're very immoral, and there's a lot of commonality about exactly what that immorality is. A lot of it has to do with fertility. So, Osiris and Isis doesn't seem to be a resurrection at all, and he continued in that existence in that way. Okay, the other ones, you got Baal. Okay, you're familiar with Baal because he is an ancient Near Eastern god. He is worshipped by a lot of the Canaanites. He is, surprise, surprise, the god of fertility. And so people would worship him with cult prostitution, and they would go into those acts. And the way that Baal would show that he had been worshipped is that he would send rain down to fertilize the earth, and it would produce fruit. Once again, there are common themes that are here. You have the female cohort that goes along with him. We say Ugaritic because that was the specific subsection of where he's worshipped. But you've got the female counterpart of Anat. Sometimes you can also see, you've got a lot of different versions of Baal that are out there, but you also have Asherah that's related to it. Baal just simply means Lord. All right. He is he does get into a battle, and there's another thing too, is that you see these cosmic battles, and this is just where theology goes awry, is that Jesus conquered death. He conquered sin by being raised from the dead and paying the price for sin. Some people have argued that Jesus' death and his atonement was just to ransom us from the powers of Satan. Look, Satan gets all the credit for sin, but he's not the one that's driving the ship. We are, okay? A lot of these, you've got a battle that's going on. He battled Mott, and it was battled all the way to the death. He was living in heaven. He was associated with the sun. He would control the storms. In fact, a lot of times he's depicted as riding on the storms. When he he battles between Mott, who is dead, and then Baal, and Mott kills Baal, takes him to the underworld, causing dry weather. Not battles Mott, kills him, cuts him up, burns him, causes a rebirth of Baal, restoring the rains. However, Mott also reappears in never-ending battle. Okay, so they just keep dying and rising and dying and rising. Okay, that'd be the deal with the Baal breakdown. This one fights death and then returns. It's very dramatic. Going back and reading our little tale here. As the guard looks at this and he says, but it's tied once again to seasons, rain, drought, and crops. This is an agrarian god. And this keeps happening. Nobody's pointing to one specific event where Baal walked out of a tomb under guard. So just because you've got a God, potentially, who gets defeated, doesn't mean that he is raised and reigns. It's just a cycle. And what is the seasons, those cycles that keep coming around? What is it that we teach about Jesus? Does he keep dying? No. He died once and for all to put away sin. So the story of Jesus, does it correspond with something like Baal? Just because there might be a commonality that there was a death, doesn't mean that there are other similarities as well. There's a lot of dissimilarities, like it is happening over and over again. All right? Those things didn't pop up, sorry. Anat kills Mott, Baal is reborn. Mott is also reborn and restarting the cycle. There's all that. Okay. That's also in your handout. All right, let's talk for a second about Dionysus. So this is one of the most widespread Greek myths. And he has a female cohort, his mother, Semele. Zeus's glory made him immortal, but ended up killing his mother. He went to the underworld to retrieve his mother. Or, as the stories, depends on who you're looking at, he was killed by the Titans. And Zeus killed the Titans, and the smoke from Zeus and Dionysus creates humans. So you do have a story that's in there. So, who exactly is being resurrected? Is it the mother or is it Dionysus? With him being the god of wine, a lot of ecstasy is going on in the ones who follow him. And so I get back to the moral laws. What did Jesus teach about morality? Does it match with the morality of these gods and goddesses? No. Right? So that's a dissimilarity. And then also, what's the purpose behind them going? Like when Jesus is killed, and he is raised from the dead, is for what purpose? Is to exalt the Father, but it's also to overcome that death. Let's see. Like I said, so you get two different versions, but it's the idea of somebody traveling to the underworld and coming back and not really being that successful with it. So over here we've got the discussion that goes on here. He said, now this one gets interesting. Dismemberment, possible return, lots of celebration, but the stories are all over the place. Different versions, different endings. Hard to build a case when your sources can't agree on what happened. So we talk about Dionysus. A lot of people want to serve Dionysus. So let's come up with as many stories as possible because it's going to fit the bill for our group and what we want to do. And so you try and bring them all together, and they just cannot jive. Well, you look at the story of Jesus when you got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all recording the story of Jesus. You got the book of Luke, Luke-Acts combination. You got the narratives and the letters of Paul, and all of them come together as one cohesive whole. Remember, our test for reliability is that these things that we're reading about Jesus are excellent. And there are no fabrications, there are no dissimilarities in the stories themselves. They all come together. Even if somebody were to look at the resurrection accounts and like, oh, those look different. No, they all tell one timeline. They all make sense. Dionysus, doesn't work that way, and so that would be one of the reasons. Okay? Adonis, he is a Phoenician god, not really a major god. His female cohort is Aphrodite. He is killed by a boar. When he went hunting one day, he was killed by a wild boar. Aphrodite wanted him back, but Persephone also thought that he was beautiful and desired to keep him, and they make an arrangement to share. So 1 year, a third of it he'll be in the underworld, a third of it he'll be with Aphrodite, and a third of it doing whatever he wants to do, okay? And he was considered a vegetation god. So if you're familiar with Aphrodite, and she is the goddess of love, and she has a temple in Corinth, which explains a lot about the Corinthian issue. And then you have Persephone, and she's the one that goes and spends time in the underworld. Well, him as well, but he's just visiting, he's just visiting these places. There's no evidence of resurrection until potentially later into the 2nd century, where somebody might try and associate that term. So he had this contract between Aphrodite and Persephone, and he was just being shared. And depending on the story that you're looking at, some of them he stays dead, and some of them he comes back. But once again, that's later. Okay? So Adonis dies tragically. People mourn, something about renewal. But again, no clear bodily resurrection, more like poetic symbolism. And frankly, no Roman guards involved, which seems like an important detail we keep having. In your story here, it's a Roman guard who's talking about it. Okay? And then we got 2 more that we'll try and knock out. All right, you've got Attis. This is an Asian god. Female cohort is Sybil. And in this story, the mother creates Attis from a fruit. And whether he actually died, how does he die? Is it suicide? Is it by accident? Is it an animal death? A lot of different possibilities there. But once again, the story begins with Zeus beating a half male, half female creature with Sybil, and made to get drunk, and then cuts off some body parts. And from one of those parts, a tree is grown from which the fruit is made for Attis. Okay, so that's where he comes from, is a tree. The backstory there. But nobody's really sure exactly what happens with his death and who is to be attributed with that. Half creature asks Zeus to return him to life, but instead he promises that his body would not decay. To prove this, his hair continued to grow, and his little finger would move sometimes. All right, so that would be the idea that they have these stories that sometimes he was just laying there. So he's in this grave, and his hair just keeps growing, and sometimes his finger would twitch. That's it. So does that sound like a resurrection of Jesus? No, like that's like, I don't know, is he actually dead or is he not? Nobody really knows. Jesus walked around, spent 40 days with people, ate with them, came into the middle of a room, walked down the street with them. All of those things happened. So with Attis, there are rumors that he comes back, but those accounts are late and unclear. Some say he doesn't really return, just continues in some vague way, not exactly a strong comparison, all right, would be the idea. So once again, you got this promise that he won't decay. Now, stop short on this one, but I think the story of Mithra is important. This is where some people, usually around Christmas, they start attributing things to Mithra. If you haven't looked at this religion, a lot of it was followed by Roman soldiers, and they had, the way that they would worship, you had these worship centers that you would go through these stages of enlightenment. So you can go look up that place, and there were stairs that were in there, but it was kind of among the cult of the Romans. But you had this being, Mithra, and he was worshipped, and he was thought to be dying and rising, and he had killed this bull. Well, he's actually based off of astrology. The way that the story is brought out is because they were looking at the stars, and there is a man, Mithra, who kills a bull the shape of those constellations. If you can ever look at those and figure out that, yeah, that looks like a person up there, or that looks like a scorpion. It's just like these random stars. Well, they had this story, and so as these winter and summer solstice would change and you would see a different view of the stars, they would say that he was dying and rising, and that's where he would come from. So it's based off of astrology. Okay, all of these things stack up nowhere near the resurrection. So what do you get? You get myths. Nowhere near an empty tomb for what we have with Jesus. Now, I know this is a lot to unpack. They're just fun. I could spend a lot more time on them because there are many others. And if you get into some of the people who worship them and things that are passed on, but I'm mostly just trying to expose you to this because what happens, somebody's going to come along and they're going to say, we've seen this before. But just because it's a coincidence and it may have some commonality doesn't mean it's borrowed. Okay? So there's that. We don't get into the miracles, but understand this, miracles really did happen. Okay, Jesus performed them, and his resurrection was a miracle. So don't just rule it out if you've never seen one. So, all right, that's what I got. Thank you. That might have been a little bit different, but I wanted to expose you to it. That is your newspaper. Go take it and read it, learn something about Jesus, and teach it to someone else. Have a good night.
I figured.
There's something sticky on there right there, and I stepped in it. I don't know what it is.